You know, they say you can never truly prepare for the moment your world flips upside down. It doesn't come with a warning or a chance to brace yourself. It just happens. That's exactly how I felt the day I found that pregnancy test shoved in the trash can of our master bathroom. It was nestled beneath a pile of crumpled tissues and an empty shampoo bottle, like a secret hidden in plain sight. At first, I thought nothing of it, just some trash I'd toss on my way out. But as I reached for it, something about the pink plastic cap caught my eye. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was instinct, but I pulled it out. And there it was, staring me right in the face. 2 bold pink lines. Positive. For a second, I just stood there, frozen, like my brain couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. My wife, Mallory, hadn't mentioned a thing about being pregnant. Why would she? We weren't trying for a baby. Hell, we hadn't been intimate in months. The excuses were endless. Headaches, late nights at work, needing space. I'd accepted it, chalking it up to a rough patch. Every couple has them, right? But now, standing there with that test in my hand, every excuse she'd ever given me started to feel like a brick in a wall she'd been quietly building between us. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was right there. The pregnancy test wasn't mine. That much was obvious. I turned the test over in my hand, studying it like the answer to all my questions might be hidden in the grooves of the plastic. My chest tightened, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts as the implications set in. This wasn't just a pregnancy. This was proof of something much darker, something I hadn't dared to consider until now. Mallory wasn't careless. She was deliberate, calculating, always 3 steps ahead. If she'd left this test where I could find it, it wasn't because she'd made a mistake. It was because she never thought I'd see it. Or worse, she didn't care if I did. Either way, it was a slap in the face. I wanted to storm downstairs and confront her, demand an explanation, yell until she couldn't twist the truth into something palatable. But I didn't. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew better. Mallory had a way of turning the tables, of making me feel like the bad guy even when I was standing knee-deep in her betrayal. I wasn't going to give her that power. Not this time. Instead, I carefully placed the test back where I'd found it, taking my time to rearrange the trash so it looked untouched. My hands were still shaking when I walked out of the bathroom, every muscle in my body screaming at me to do something, anything, to make sense of what I'd just uncovered. But I didn't. I couldn't. I sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, pretending to scroll while I listened for her footsteps upstairs. When she finally came down, her hair was damp from the shower, her expression serene, as if she hadn't just detonated a bomb in the middle of our marriage. She poured herself a cup of coffee, her fingers scrolling lazily through Instagram, oblivious to the storm brewing in my chest. "Good morning," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "You look like you slept well. Long day at work today?" She glanced up briefly, her face unreadable, then shrugged. "Same old meetings, deadlines, the usual." Her casual tone made my stomach churn. She was lying, effortlessly, flawlessly. If I hadn't found the test, I might have believed her. But now, every word out of her mouth felt like poison, sweet enough to swallow but lethal all the same. I wanted to scream, to hurl the coffee mug right out of her smug hands and demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled, calm as a saint, and took another sip of my coffee. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about survival. If Mallory thought I was just some oblivious husband she could manipulate, she had another thing coming. By the time she left for work, I had a plan. It wasn't perfect. Hell, it wasn't even fully formed. But it was a start. I was going to find out the truth, no matter how deep I had to dig. That day marked the beginning of the end, though I didn't know it yet. All I knew was that the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with had been hiding something from me. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that secrets have a way of unraveling. All it takes is one loose thread, and I had just found it. After finding the pregnancy test, I became a shadow in my own house, a quiet observer, watching, waiting, piecing together the puzzle that was my wife, Mallory. She moved through our home as though nothing had changed, like the bombshell I discovered in the trash didn't exist. And the scary part? She was good at it. Too good. At breakfast the next morning, I sat across from her, carefully watching her every move. She poured herself a cup of coffee, her favorite caramel creamer swirling into the black liquid like clockwork. She smiled at me, but it didn't reach her eyes. Busy day ahead? I asked casually, keeping my tone light. Always, she said, flashing me a practiced smile. Meetings and deadlines. You know how it is. The words slid off her tongue so easily, but I wasn't fooled. Not anymore. Her late nights at work, the sudden need for space, and her excuses about being too tired. They all played back in my mind like a highlight reel of red flags I'd ignored for far too long. But now, I wasn't ignoring them. I was dissecting them. That morning, as she got ready for work, I noticed something new. Her phone. Normally, she left it on the counter or tossed it onto the couch without a second thought. But today, it was practically glued to her hand. Even when she walked to the bathroom, she took it with her, holding it like it contained the answers to the universe. You've been on your phone a lot lately, I said, my voice calm, curious. Everything okay? She froze for just a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to catch it. Then, she laughed, waving me off like I was being ridiculous. Oh, it's nothing. Just some stomach issues. Probably that sushi we had the other night. I almost laughed out loud. We hadn't eaten sushi in weeks, but I nodded, pretending to buy the lie, even as my resolve hardened. If she was lying about something as small as sushi, what else was she lying about? Later that day, while she was at work, I decided to dig deeper. I wasn't proud of it. Snooping felt dirty, invasive, but this wasn't paranoia. This was survival. I started with the trash. It felt fitting in a way, since that's where this whole mess had started. I sifted through crumpled tissues, receipts, and empty packaging until I found what I was looking for. A receipt from a boutique in the next town over. It was dated 2 days ago and listed a string of items that didn't belong in our house. Luxury candles, silk lingerie, and a bottle of men's cologne. My stomach twisted as I stared at the paper, my mind racing. She didn't buy those things for me. That much was clear. But for who? And why? That night, I tested her again. We were sitting on the couch, half watching a reality show I couldn't care less about, when I casually brought it up. So, who's the cologne for? I asked, keeping my tone light, almost teasing. Her head snapped toward me so fast I thought she might get whiplash. For a moment, she just stared at me, her face a mix of confusion and panic. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice sharp. I held up the receipt, letting her see it. This. From Tuesday. I didn't realize you'd gone shopping. Her mask slipped for just a second. Her eyes widened, and her mouth opened like she was about to say something. But then she recovered, laughing it off like I just told a bad joke. Oh, that. It's for my boss, she said, her tone breezy. His birthday's coming up, and the team pitched in for a gift. I didn't think it was a big deal, so I didn't mention it. It was a good lie, quick, believable, and just vague enough to discourage follow-up questions. But it wasn't good enough. Not this time. Oh, nice of you to take the lead on that, I said, forcing a smile. I'm sure he'll love it. She relaxed, sinking back into the couch with a relieved sigh. She had no idea I was onto her, no clue that I was already 2 steps ahead. As I watched her, laughing at the show like nothing was wrong, I felt a strange mix of anger and determination. This wasn't just about catching her anymore. This was about making sure she couldn't wiggle her way out of it. The next morning, I noticed another pattern. She'd been leaving earlier for work, claiming she had early meetings or client deadlines. But today, I decided to test her story. After she left, I followed her. I kept a safe distance, driving a few cars behind as she navigated through downtown. At first, everything seemed normal. She took her usual route, her sleek white SUV gliding through the streets like she had nothing to hide. But then, she took an unexpected turn, one that led to a small boutique cafe on the edge of town. I parked a block away, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I watched her step out of the car. She was dressed to the nines in a fitted dress I hadn't seen before, paired with heels that clicked sharply against the pavement. My stomach churned. This wasn't just a coffee run. As I watched her walk into the cafe, my mind raced. She thought she was so clever, so untouchable. But she didn't realize I was already peeling back the layers of her lies. And I wasn't stopping until I reached the truth. I thought I'd prepared myself for whatever I might find that day, but nothing could have truly braced me for the sight of Mallory walking into that cafe, dressed to impress, her every step radiating a confidence that churned my stomach. She didn't seem like a woman on her way to work. She seemed like a woman with something, or someone, to look forward to. I stayed parked a block away, partially hidden behind an old pickup truck, watching her through the windshield like some amateur detective in a bad thriller movie. My heart raced as she disappeared inside, and for a moment, I questioned myself. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was just some harmless coffee meeting. But the dress, the heels, the carefully curled hair, it all screamed otherwise. And then I saw him. He strolled up to the cafe a few minutes later, tall and confident, his business casual attire just casual enough to make him seem approachable, but polished enough to reek of importance. He paused outside, checked his watch, and then stepped inside without so much as a glance around. My pulse quickened, a steady drumbeat in my ears. I didn't need to see anything more to know who he was. He was the reason for the cologne, the long hours, the sudden space she needed. My stomach churned as I wrestled with the urge to burst into the cafe, flip their cozy little table, and demand answers. But I knew better. Losing my cool wouldn't give me what I needed. Proof. Solid, undeniable proof that Mallory wasn't just lying to me. She was betraying me. So, I waited. About 15 minutes later, I saw them through the cafe's front window. They were seated at a corner table, leaning in close, their heads almost touching as they talked and laughed like they didn't have a care in the world. Her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months, a glow I'd almost forgotten she was capable of. And the way he looked at her? It was like he was seeing his entire world in that moment. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, forcing myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time for anger. This was the time for action. I pulled out my phone, adjusted the zoom, and snapped photo after photo. Mallory leaning toward him reaching across the table to touch her hand. Her laughing like he'd just told the funniest joke in the world. Every frame was another nail in the coffin of our marriage. They stayed there for over an hour, sharing what looked like a pastry and sipping their lattes as if the world outside didn't exist. I sat there, watching, documenting, feeling like I was suffocating under the weight of my own discovery. When they finally got up to leave, I started my car and followed them at a safe distance. They walked to their cars, parked side by side, and lingered by the driver's side door of his. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face before leaning in to kiss her cheek. She didn't pull away. If anything, she leaned into it, smiling up at him like he was the sun, the moon, and everything in between. I clenched my jaw, my stomach twisting as I forced myself to stay in my car. Storming out now would only ruin the plan I was building. I needed more than just a scene at a cafe. I needed her lies exposed in their entirety. After they parted ways, I drove home in silence, the photos and moments replaying in my mind like a broken record. The anger was there, boiling under the surface, but it was overshadowed by something deeper: betrayal. The woman I'd trusted, the woman I'd built my life with, was sneaking around behind my back, and she thought she could keep it from me. That evening, when Mallory walked through the door with takeout bags in hand, her face lit up like she'd just won the lottery. "I got your favorite," she chirped, pulling out boxes of barbecue ribs and mac and cheese. "Figured we could have a nice dinner together. You've been working so hard lately." Her tone was so cheerful, her performance so convincing. I might have fallen for it if I hadn't just watched her giggling over lattes with another man. I forced a smile, playing along. "That's thoughtful of you." "Thanks, Mel." We ate dinner together, her chatter filling the room while I nodded, laughed, and played the part of the clueless husband. But in the back of my mind, I was laying the groundwork for what came next. After dinner, I cleared the plates, watching her scroll through her phone as she leaned against the counter. "How's work been lately?" I asked casually, wiping my hands on a dish towel. She didn't even look up. "Same old grind. Deadlines, meetings, you know how it is." "Must be exhausting," I said, my voice steady. "Late nights, early mornings. You're impressive, Mallory." That got her attention. She looked up, her smile faltering for just a second. "It's not so bad," she said quickly. "Besides, I'm doing it for us, right? Building our future." I nodded, hiding the smirk threatening to form. She had no idea I'd already unraveled her lies. No idea I was just biding my time. That night, as she slept beside me, her breathing soft and steady, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I wasn't angry, not in the explosive, irrational way. No, my anger was sharp, focused, methodical. I'd seen enough to know what was happening, but not enough to confront her. Not yet. I needed more. And I'd get it. The morning after watching Mallory and Luke at the cafe, I woke up with a single thought in my mind. I needed to know everything. It wasn't enough to have photos of them sharing lattes or a receipt for lingerie. I needed something concrete, undeniable, something that would dismantle the lies she'd wrapped our marriage in. So, I waited for her to leave for work. She kissed me on the cheek like nothing had changed, like she wasn't actively building a life with another man. Her audacity was almost impressive. Almost. Once she was gone, I booted up her laptop. Mallory wasn't exactly tech-savvy, and her passwords were laughably easy to guess. It took me all of 5 minutes to access her email. My hands hovered over the keyboard, a strange mix of guilt and determination swirling inside me. I hated that it had come to this, but I needed answers, and there they were. Her inbox was a treasure trove of secrets, each email more damning than the last. Messages from someone named Luke littered her inbox, their playful tone and inside jokes painting a clear picture of their relationship. They weren't explicit, Mallory wasn't stupid, but they didn't need to be. Phrases like, "Can't wait to see you again," and "Yesterday was amazing," said more than enough. I scrolled deeper, my stomach sinking with every message. Then I saw it, an email chain discussing a doctor's appointment. It was vague, just a date and time, but it was enough to catch my attention. A quick check of her calendar confirmed it. Friday, 3 p.m., Dr. Carlson, prenatal checkup. My heart stopped. Prenatal checkup. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Not only was Mallory pregnant, but she was actively managing the pregnancy behind my back, planning appointments with a man I just watched kiss her cheek like she belonged to him. I stared at the screen, the words blurring together as my mind raced. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was a calculated, deliberate attempt to rewrite our entire life. The weight of it pressed down on me, but I didn't let it consume me. Instead, I leaned into the cold, sharp focus that had carried me this far. This was my smoking gun, the piece of evidence I needed to expose her for what she was. But I couldn't act on it yet, not until I was sure there was no way for her to wriggle out of it. When Friday came, I told her I had errands to run. She barely looked up from her phone as she told me to take my time. I smiled to myself, knowing she had no idea I'd already mapped out my entire afternoon. By 2:30 p.m., I was parked across the street from the clinic listed in her calendar. It was a small, unassuming building tucked between a pharmacy and a dental office. Nothing about it screamed life-altering revelation, but I knew better. I waited, my eyes fixed on the parking lot. At 2:58 p.m., her white SUV pulled in. She stepped out, her hand resting on her stomach in a gesture so subtle it made my chest tighten. She glanced around, her expression nervous, before walking toward the entrance. And then Luke arrived. He was already there, standing by the door with a coffee cup in hand, looking every bit the doting partner. The sight of him made my blood boil, but I stayed calm. This wasn't the time for confrontation. They greeted each other with a hug. Lingering, intimate, the kind of hug that said everything they weren't willing to say in words. She smiled up at him, her face glowing in a way I hadn't seen in months. They disappeared inside, and I followed. I didn't go through the main entrance. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I slipped in through a propped-open delivery door near the back. The hallway was quiet, lined with generic office doors and bland medical posters. I could hear their voices down the hall, faint but unmistakable. When I reached the source of the sound, I found them in a small exam room, the door partially open. Mallory was sitting on the exam table, her hand resting on her stomach as the doctor spoke. Luke sat beside her, nodding along like this was the happiest day of his life. I pulled out my phone and hit record. Her laugh. His hand brushing hers. The doctor flipping through charts. It was all there, captured in vivid detail. I stayed long enough to capture what I needed, then slipped out the way I'd come. Back in my car, I reviewed the footage, my hands shaking with a mix of rage and adrenaline. There was no denying it now. She wasn't just cheating. She was building a future with him, one that she had no intention of including me in. That night, as she sat across from me at the dinner table, her face lit up with fake enthusiasm, I felt strangely calm. She thought she was in control, thought she could keep me in the dark. But I wasn't in the dark anymore. I was holding the match. And when I struck it, her carefully constructed world would go up in flames. The moment I stepped out of that clinic on Friday, I knew it was time to strike. The truth wasn't just sitting in my back pocket anymore. It was a fire burning through my thoughts, waiting to be unleashed. But this couldn't be about anger, not yet. Anger was messy, reactive. I needed precision. If I confronted Mallory too soon, she'd twist the narrative, play the victim, and somehow make me look like the villain. No, this had to be calculated, and the perfect opportunity came the very next night. "Let's go out to dinner," she suggested Saturday morning, her tone breezy as she stood in the kitchen pouring coffee. It's been ages since we had a nice evening out, just the two of us. I almost laughed at the irony. A nice evening out? With her? The same woman who had been building a life behind my back with another man? But I nodded, hiding my disgust behind a smile. "That sounds great," I said. "Let's do it." By the time we arrived at the restaurant, a high-end Italian spot downtown, my plan was fully formed. She was dressed to kill, in a deep red dress that hugged her frame perfectly. I hadn't seen it before, which told me exactly who it was meant to impress. Her heels clicked against the polished floor as we walked to our table, her perfume trailing behind her like an invisible warning sign. But I kept my composure, playing the part of the loving husband. The first half of dinner was almost laughable. She chatted about her day, about work, about how we should plan a weekend getaway soon. Every word that came out of her mouth felt like a carefully rehearsed performance, designed to make me think everything was fine. She even reached across the table at one point, placing her hand over mine like we were a picture-perfect couple. I wanted to pull away, but I didn't. Not yet. It wasn't until she was halfway through a plate of linguine that I made my move. "You know," I said, swirling the wine in my glass, "I've been thinking a lot about us lately, about our future." Her fork paused mid-twirl. She looked up at me, her smile faltering for a brief second before she recovered. "Oh, what brought that on?" I leaned back in my chair, keeping my tone light, conversational. "I don't know. You just seem distracted lately, like something's been on your mind." Her eyes darted to the side for the briefest moment, a flicker of panic crossing her face. "Distracted? Nathan, I've just been busy with work. You know how it is. Deadlines, meetings, it never ends." I nodded thoughtfully, letting her think she was still in control. "Right. And all those late nights, the networking meetings, the trips out of town, that's all just work, huh?" Her grip on her fork tightened, her knuckles turning white. "Nathan, what are you trying to say? You're making it sound like I've done something wrong." "Oh, not at all," I said, leaning forward now, my voice dropping to a low, measured tone. "I trust you, Mallory. I trust you to always look out for yourself, to cover your tracks, to think you're smarter than everyone else in the room. But here's the thing. I'm not as stupid as you think I am." Her face froze, the color draining from her cheeks. For the first time in months, she didn't have a quick response. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, holding it up so she could see the thumbnail of the video I'd recorded at the clinic. Her eyes widened, her mouth opening like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. "What the hell is that?" she hissed, her voice low but venomous. "You know exactly what it is," I said, my tone calm but laced with steel. "I followed you, Mallory. I saw you with him. The clinic, the hug, the little prenatal pep talk with the doctor. I've got it all right here." She glanced around the restaurant, her panic evident as she tried to maintain some semblance of composure. "Nathan, keep your voice down," she whispered. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I leaned in closer, my voice barely above a whisper. Let me guess. You were planning to pin the baby on me, right? Play happy family while sneaking off with Luke whenever you felt like it? Or was he going to stay in the shadows, your little secret? Her mask slipped entirely then, her eyes narrowing with a mix of fear and fury. You wouldn't dare, she spat. I leaned back in my chair, smiling coldly. Try me. For the first time in our marriage, Mallory looked powerless. The woman who always seemed to have the upper hand, who could manipulate any situation to her advantage, was sitting across from me with nowhere to run. Here's the deal, I said, sliding my phone back into my pocket. You've got two options. 1. You come clean, right here, right now, and we figure out what happens next. Or 2. I walk out of this restaurant, send everything to Luke's wife, and watch your perfect little world burn to the ground. Your call. Her jaw clenched, her hands trembling as she set down her fork. For a moment, I thought she might fight back, that she'd try to twist the narrative like she always did. But then the fire in her eyes dimmed, replaced by something colder. Resignation. Fine, she said, her voice sharp and biting. You want the truth? Here it is. Fine, she said again, her voice trembling with suppressed anger as she leaned forward, locking her defiant eyes on mine. You want the truth? Here it is. Yes, I've been seeing Luke. Yes, I've made mistakes. But don't sit there acting like some innocent saint, Nathan. You shut me out months ago. You've been so predictable, so boring. There it was. The knife she'd been waiting to twist. She didn't even try to deny it or sugarcoat the truth. Instead, she turned the blame onto me, as if her lies and betrayal were somehow justified by her dissatisfaction. I let her words hang in the air for a moment, staring at her as the noise of the restaurant buzzed faintly in the background. She sat back, folding her arms, her expression daring me to respond. Boring, I repeated, my voice low and calm, though my chest was tight with anger. Predictable. That's your excuse for lying, cheating, and planning to trap me into raising another man's child? Because I didn't keep you entertained? You don't get it, she snapped, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself and glanced around the room. She leaned in again, her tone sharper but quieter. Luke understands me. He listens, Nathan. He makes me feel alive, like I'm not just some accessory in his life. Can you honestly say you've done the same for me? I laughed then, a cold, humorless sound that made her flinch. You're unbelievable, Mallory. You don't want a partner. You want an audience. Someone to clap for you while you play the victim in your own damn soap opera. Her face flushed, a mix of anger and embarrassment, but I didn't give her a chance to speak. Here's the thing, I continued, leaning forward so only she could hear me. I don't care about your excuses. I don't care why you did what you did, because at the end of the day, it doesn't change the fact that you lied. You cheated. You betrayed me, Mallory. So don't sit there and try to justify it like you're the victim here. You're not. Her jaw tightened, her composure crumbling under the weight of my words. She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off, my tone sharper now. You've spent months lying to my face, sneaking around with him, planning your little fantasy life while leaving me in the dark. And you thought you could get away with it, didn't you? You thought I'd just keep playing the clueless husband while you strung me along? I pulled my phone out again, tapping the screen to bring up the video from the clinic. But here's the thing, Mallory. I'm not as clueless as you think. I've got the photos, the emails, the video, everything. And if you think for 1 second I won't use it, you're dead wrong. Her eyes widened, fear flickering across her face as she stared at the phone in my hand. Nathan, you don't have to do this, she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. We can fix this. I'll end things with Luke, No, I interrupted, my voice cold and final. There's no fixing this, Mallory. You made your choices, and now you're going to face the consequences. Her hands trembled as she reached for her glass of wine, taking a shaky sip before setting it down again. What do you want from me? She asked, her tone defeated. First, I said, my voice steady, I want the truth. All of it. No more lies, no more games. And second, I paused, leaning back in my chair, letting her squirm under the weight of my gaze. I want you out. Pack your things. Move in with Luke. Go wherever the hell you want. But you're done here, Mallory. This is my house, and I'm not sharing it with you for one more second. Her face paled, her perfectly curated mask slipping away entirely. Nathan, please. You're being unreasonable. Unreasonable? I snapped, my voice rising for the first time. You lied to me. You cheated on me. You tried to trap me into raising another man's child, and you think I'm being unreasonable? She flinched at my words, her eyes glistening with tears she didn't bother to shed. For a moment, I thought she might fight back, try to claw her way out of the hole she'd dug. But instead, she looked down at the table, her shoulders slumping in defeat. What do you want me to do? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I already told you, I said, my tone sharp. You pack your things, and you get out. Tonight. And don't think for a second I won't send all of this to Luke's wife if you try to make this difficult for me. She looked up then, her expression a mix of anger and desperation. You wouldn't. Try me, I said, cutting her off. For the first time in our marriage, Mallory looked truly powerless. The woman who had always seemed so confident, so untouchable, was sitting across from me with nowhere to run. Without another word, I stood up, tossing some cash onto the table to cover the bill. You've got until tomorrow morning, I said over my shoulder as I walked away. After that, you're on your own. The cold night air hit me as I stepped outside, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was in control. By the time I returned home that night, I already knew what my next move was. Mallory could pack her bags and leave, but Luke wasn't going to get away unscathed. He wasn't just some bystander in this mess. He was a co-conspirator, and he had a life of his own that was about to come crashing down. I poured myself a drink, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. It didn't take long to find Luke's wife, Christine. I'd seen her name on his LinkedIn profile during my earlier digging. She was the perfect picture of suburban happiness. 2 kids, a golden retriever, and a husband who moonlighted as my wife's secret lover. The thought of her blissful ignorance churned my stomach, but it also fueled my resolve. She deserved to know the truth, even if it would tear her world apart. I spent the next hour crafting the email. Short, direct, and impossible to ignore. I attached the photos of Luke and Mallory at the cafe, the video from the clinic, and screenshots of their flirtatious emails. I didn't add commentary or embellishments, just the cold, hard evidence. Let the truth speak for itself. Before I hit send, I stared at the screen for a moment, my finger hovering over the button. Part of me hesitated, wondering if I was crossing a line, if this would make me as bad as them. But then I remembered the look on Mallory's face when she tried to blame her betrayal on me. The way she laughed with Luke over lattes while I sat at home, oblivious. They didn't care about the line when they crossed it. So why should I? I clicked send. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. Less than an hour later, my phone buzzed with an incoming email. It was from Christine. Her message was raw, a mix of shock, gratitude, and devastation. She thanked me for telling her the truth, said she had suspected something was off for months but couldn't prove it. She promised to take action and warned me that Luke wouldn't take this lying down. She wasn't wrong. The next afternoon, my phone rang. The number wasn't saved, but I recognized it from one of Luke's emails. I answered, already bracing myself for the confrontation. What the hell do you think you're doing? His voice was sharp, furious, and laced with panic. You have no right. No right? I cut him off, my tone icy. You slept with my wife. You lied to your own. And you think I don't have the right to call you out on it? Spare me, Luke. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him scrambling for a response, trying to regain some semblance of control. But I wasn't done. Let me make this very clear, I continued, my voice low and steady. If you or Mallory try to contact me again, if you so much as send me a text, I will take this public. I've got enough evidence to ruin you completely. Your job, your reputation, your perfect little life. It'll all go up in flames. So unless you want that, you'll stay far away from me. You're a real piece of work, he spat, his anger barely masking the fear in his voice. "No, Luke," I said, my tone cutting. "That's you. I'm just the guy who refuses to let you get away with it." Before he could respond, I hung up, a wave of satisfaction washing over me. He'd underestimated me, just like Mallory had, and now he was paying the price. The days that followed were a whirlwind of fallout. Christine filed for divorce almost immediately, and from what I heard through mutual acquaintances, she didn't hold back. She aired their dirty laundry for all to see, leaving Luke scrambling to pick up the pieces. His reputation at work took a hit, and the picture-perfect family life he'd curated was shattered. As for Mallory, she tried reaching out once. A single text that simply read, "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long moment before deleting it without responding. There was nothing left to say. She'd made her choices, and now she had to live with them. Words spread quickly among our social circle. People whispered, speculated, and took sides, but I didn't care. Let them talk. I had the truth on my side, and that was all I needed. One evening, as I sat on the back porch with a drink in hand, I felt an odd sense of peace. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it didn't control me anymore. It was a reminder, a scar that would fade with time but never truly disappear. Luke and Mallory had tried to build their fantasy on a foundation of lies, and now it had crumbled beneath them. Christine was free from his deceit, and I was free from hers. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about reclaiming control over a life they tried to steal from me. And as for Luke, he learned the hard way that some people don't roll over when you push them. Some of us push back. The morning after Mallory packed her things and left, the house felt eerily quiet. I stood in the living room, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound, and let the silence settle over me. It wasn't the suffocating kind of silence that had crept into our marriage over the past year. This was different. This was peaceful. I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd lost in the chaos of being with her. Mallory's presence had filled the house with a constant pressure, an invisible weight that I'd grown so accustomed to that I didn't even notice it until it was gone. Now, every room felt lighter, every breath easier. But the emptiness brought its own challenges. There was no denying the sting of betrayal, the lingering questions that tugged at the back of my mind. Had I missed the signs? Should I have done something differently? These thoughts came in waves, but I let them pass. I wasn't going to drown in a sea of self-doubt. Not anymore. Instead, I focused on reclaiming the life I'd let slip through my fingers. The first step was tackling the house. It felt like a battlefield, every room holding traces of her. The closet still smelled faintly of her perfume. The bathroom counter was empty where her products had once been. Even the coffee mugs she favored felt like relics of a life that no longer existed. I spent an entire weekend scrubbing the place clean, not just physically, but emotionally. I packed up the last of her things, boxing them up and leaving them in the garage. I rearranged the furniture, bought a new set of dishes, and even painted the bedroom a different color. It wasn't about erasing her. It was about making the space mine again. Once the house felt like mine, I turned my attention inward. I pulled my old guitar out of the closet, its strings dusty and stiff from years of neglect. Playing it again felt strange at first, my fingers fumbling over chords I used to know by heart. But with each strum, the tension in my chest eased. It was like reconnecting with an old friend, one who reminded me of who I'd been before Mallory. I started running again, too. The first few mornings were rough. My legs protested every step, and my lungs burned with the effort. But there was something cathartic about it. The steady rhythm of my feet on the pavement, the crisp morning air, the way my mind emptied with each mile. It was the kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. I even reached out to some old friends, people I drifted away from during my marriage. Their reactions were a mix of surprise and relief. "We always wondered what you saw in her," one of them admitted over a beer one night. I laughed it off, but the truth stung. Had I really been so blind? But I didn't dwell on it. This wasn't about dissecting the past. It was about building a future. And for the first time in a long time, I started thinking about what that future might look like. Not in a grand, sweeping sense, no big plans or lofty goals. Just the small, simple things that made life feel good again. I found myself savoring the quiet moments. A cup of coffee on the porch as the sun rose, the way the air smelled after a rainstorm, the satisfaction of cooking a meal from scratch. These were things I'd taken for granted before, but now they felt like victories. Proof that I could find joy on my own. Of course, the past still lingered. There were days when I'd catch myself replaying conversations with Mallory in my head, wondering if there had been a moment where things could have gone differently. There were nights when the silence felt heavy, the emptiness of the house too loud to ignore. But those moments didn't define me. I reminded myself of the strength it took to walk away, to stand up for myself when it would have been easier to stay quiet. I reminded myself that I deserved better than the lies and betrayal she'd offered. And slowly, I began to see her betrayal not as an ending, but as a beginning. A chance to start fresh, to rebuild my life on my own terms. One day, while organizing my office, I came across an old photo of us. It was from the early days of our marriage, back when everything had seemed perfect. We were smiling, carefree, wrapped up in a version of love that felt like it belonged to someone else. I stared at it for a long time before tossing it into the shredder. That chapter of my life was over. As for Mallory, I didn't keep tabs on her. I heard through the grapevine that her relationship with Luke didn't last, that the pressure of their shared guilt tore them apart. She moved to another city, her once polished life reduced to whispers and rumors. It wasn't my concern anymore. The Nathan who had once bent over backward to keep her happy, who had ignored the cracks in their marriage to maintain the illusion of stability, was gone. In his place was someone stronger, someone who knew his worth and wasn't willing to compromise it again. For the first time in months, I felt free. The days that followed were a whirlwind of whispers, fallout, and revelations. Mallory was gone, her things packed in her car vanishing down the driveway like a bad memory, finally leaving my life. I watched her go from the upstairs window, a strange mix of relief and anger churning in my chest. The house felt quieter now, but the emptiness was different. It wasn't suffocating. It was mine. I didn't hear from her directly again, except for a single text, "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long moment before deleting it. What was there to say? She had burned every bridge between us, and I wasn't about to waste time rebuilding something that had already turned to ash. But Mallory wasn't the only one facing consequences. Luke's wife, Christine, wasted no time filing for divorce. She sent me a final email to thank me for exposing the truth, her words raw with pain and resolve. "I'll never forget what you've done for me," she wrote. "You saved me from a man who didn't deserve me." The fallout didn't end there. Christine didn't just end her marriage. She aired their dirty laundry for all to see. Luke's once polished reputation took a nosedive, his career faltering as whispers spread through their social circles and his professional network. It was poetic, really. The man who had strutted so confidently into my life, thinking he could steal my wife and walk away unscathed, was now paying the price for his arrogance. I didn't follow Mallory's every move after she left, but word got back to me through mutual acquaintances. Her relationship with Luke didn't last. It was doomed from the start, built on lies and guilt. She moved to another city, her once pristine image tarnished. But that was her problem now, not mine. For me, the aftermath wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding, reclaiming, and moving forward. One afternoon, while clearing out the last remnants of our shared life, I came across an old photo of us. We were smiling, young and carefree, wrapped up in a love that seemed so real back then. I stared at it for a long time, the memories swirling around me like ghosts. But instead of holding on to it, I tossed it into the shredder. That chapter of my life was over, and I wasn't going to let it haunt me any longer. In the quiet weeks that followed, I found myself rediscovering who I was. I spent more time outside, running in the mornings and breathing in the crisp air. I dusted off my old guitar, letting the familiar chords fill the house. I even reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years, their laughter a reminder of the joy I'd let slip away during my marriage. The silence of the house, which had once felt so oppressive, now felt like peace. I started savoring the little things. A cup of coffee on the porch as the sun rose, the satisfaction of cooking a meal from scratch, the weight of a good book in my hands. These weren't grand gestures or dramatic changes. They were small victories, proof that I could build a life that was mine and mine alone. Of course, there were still moments when the memories crept back in, uninvited and unwelcome. The sting of betrayal didn't vanish overnight, and there were times when I caught myself replaying conversations, wondering if there had been a moment when things could have gone differently. But those moments didn't define me. If anything, they reminded me of how far I'd come. The Nathan who had once bent over backward to keep Mallory happy, who had ignored the warning signs to maintain the illusion of a perfect marriage, was gone. In his place was someone stronger, someone who knew his worth and wasn't afraid to demand better. As for Mallory and Luke, their downfall was a cautionary tale to anyone who thought they could build a life on lies. They had underestimated me, just as they had underestimated Christine, and while they faced the wreckage of their choices, I was building something new, something real. The scars of their betrayal would always be there, faint reminders of the pain they'd caused, but they didn't control me anymore. They were just part of the story, not the ending. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that betrayal doesn't just break you, it rebuilds you. It strips away the illusions and forces you to confront the truth about who you are and what you deserve. So, to anyone stuck in the kind of toxic situation I endured, I have this to say: don't stay. Don't settle. Hold your head high, walk away, and let the people who betrayed you drown in their own mess. Because there's nothing more satisfying than watching them crumble while you rise. And rise, I did.